So back to our annoying wall here, which is actually not even a wall, it's just a box with a texture on it. We will, work with a real wall later on. But what we want to talk about in this video is actually something that is very special to RBDs, and that is angular velocity or rotational speed. So in other contexts of Houdini, we usually, think in points, pops or even vellum. And later on flips, they all are, thinking about things in terms of points. And that's also true for RBDs, because this wall we know we will pack later on. But the special thing is, even if we pack it to a single point, which means that we lose our texture, of course, this thing represents a three-dimensional object, of course. And that means we can think of it as something that rotates. Because if it would rotate, because it's not, an infinitely small thing like a point, a rotation actually is visible and makes sense. And this is why what we are looking at now, rotational speed or angular velocity, is something that doesn't exist in any other context. What is angular speed? We already know v, and let's quickly double check that we can use that. So we can give this object a velocity, let's say on y, so that it is of the jumpy nature. And if we put this into a bullet solver, and before we press play, let's right away unpack this so that we can have our texture back. And if you run this now, because we give it a start velocity on our first frame, it should jump up. And that's what it does, and then it falls down. Now, the same we can now do with another attribute, again, that only exists in the context of RBDs, called W, which comes from the lower symbol omega, which is used to describe angular speed in real physics. And this is why it's W, which is kind of handy because it's right next to V. And with this, we can describe the movement of an object not in a form of a translation, so a movement in a direction, but its rotation. So if we set this to a vector of 0, 0, 5, let's say, and you can see it's a vector because it describes rotation around the three main axes, we can make this wall rotate around the z-axis with a speed of 5 degrees per second. So if I run this now, you can see it rotates and it jumps. So to make this a bit less confusing, let's turn off the velocity for now by just commenting it out. And let's actually call this V and W. And also let's turn off for now in the bullet solver the gravity for a second by just setting it to 0. And if I run this now, all we have is the angular speed, and you can see it keeps rotating forever. And the reason is that there's nothing stopping it from rotating. Before we move on though, why is there no W? The thing is, as we can see, we can bring in the W into the simulation to control the rotation, but also we should be able to read it out of the simulation. And actually, if we look at the bullet solver itself, we have W, but because we unpack it, we lose all the attributes that were on the packed version. So let's make sure that we transfer all attributes so that we can see them. And here you can see the W that we created, and it stays on 5 on Z. Now, to slow this down with a drag, there's actually a way of doing this in the bullet solver right here under forces, where we turn off the gravity. There's a normal drag. This is, of course, for the translation, so for V. So it doesn't matter how high I put this. This has no effect on W or angular speed. But there's also a drag spin, and this is what will slow down W. So we have here the goal axis that we ignore this for now, and also the goal spin speed, but we have a spin resistance, which is currently really low. So it's a 5 with 5 zeros before the dot. What you can see is that W actually slows down really slowly. So let's increase that to something like 1, which is, 100,000 times faster or higher than the number that was in there before. So let's run this again. And now you can see it very quickly stops down. So you can actually create a spin drag, which is really helpful to know. So let's lower this back to something less crazy. And you can see now it slows down over time, which can be helpful, to stop anything that spins from, continuously spinning without drag. The other thing you can do as well is that you can give it a goal spin speed. So that means you can actually define what rotation you want around which axis, that's the goal axis, and then what speed it should have around this axis. Let's set this to 10 and see what happens. And you should be able to see, it's not strong enough, but you can see here that something is happening, that the W of Y is changing. So let's increase that even further, our goal speed. And what that means is that we try to bring everything in our simulation to a speed of 1000 around the axis 0, 1, 0. Now this is now of course combined with the W we set in the beginning. So let's maybe turn off the starting angular speed for now. And if we run this now, you can see that we can, make something spin in our simulation like a force, but only for the angular velocity. So this is all the things you can do under add, drag, spin. You can give it a goal spin with a goal axis, and you can give it a spin resistance. So if it has a rotation, then it will slow down. Now let's go back to our example from before, which is our cannonball here. And we had this, that it throws our wall around. And what we can do here, again, if we put a star into transfer attributes to actually see what comes out on the packed geometry, we can see that there's a W. And what I want to show you is we not only can, set it to something, but any movement that happens to a packed object usually involves some kind of rotation as well. And here you can see that pretty well. The wall basically is not only moving in a certain direction, but it also rotates around its center. And this is what we see here in the W. So keep in mind that W is basically always a part of your movement in an RBD simulation, because as we can see here, most things are a combination of a translation and a rotation around the center of the object, or basically where the point that represents the object is, which I think we can show the best by deleting the geometry. Oh, it's not the unpacked version. There it is. So this is the point that represents the wall, and the rotation is relative to this point. This is what W means here. So keep that in mind. W you can read out. You can also set. You can of course also set it during the simulation, and it just gives you an additional way of controlling your simulations the way you want. So pretty important, W for omega or angular speed. So I hope this is helpful. Thanks very much and see you later. Cheers.